Okay, hopefully this works now. Holy. Well, hi everybody. I hope you're doing well. You guys ever have, I don't know, if you're a true crime buff, have one of those cases that just kind of sticks with you? This one does for me. Sylvia Likens. What was done to her was awful. It was bad, really bad. So what the point of this video is I'm going to just basically tell you about her life and what happened with her. She was a victim of homicide, and sadly, she was only 16 years old. Okay, so her name is Sylvia Marie Likens. She was born January 3rd, 1949. And when she passed, it was October 26, 1965. She was an American teenager who was tortured and unalived by her caregiver, Gertrude Banzowski, many of Banzowski's children, and several of their neighborhood friends. Okay, on that note, I've seen both movies, read the books, read the articles, and I think that's why this sticks with me. But the main point of it that really got me was actually hearing Sylvia Likens' EVP. It is heart-wrenching. She's still at that house. She really is. Somebody needs to go and help this poor girl. This ABUSE incrementally lasted for 3 months before Likens passed from her extensive injuries and malnourishment on October 26, 1965 in Indianapolis, Indiana. Gertrude, that was the caretaker. She was a single mother, I believe, of 3 or 4 kids. Her oldest daughter, Paula, her son, John, and 2 neighborhood youths, Coy Hubbard and Richard Hobbs, were all tried and convicted in May 1996 of neglecting, torturing, unaliving Likens. At the defendant's trial, Deputy Prosecutor Leroy New described the case as the most diabolical case to ever come before a court or jury, and Gertrude's defense attorney, William C. Erbecker, described Likens as having been subjected to acts of degradation that you wouldn't commit on a dog before her passing. So she was 16. The neighborhood kids were young. And this woman, Gertrude Banzowski, she was giving them cigarettes. She was giving them alcohol. She was telling these kids to help torture this poor girl that she kept on a mattress in the basement, locked down there. You know how kids get influenced? This woman, what she did not only allowed these children to do, I mean, it's just one of those things. I can't fathom it. After 8 hours of deliberation, the jury found Gertrude Banzowski guilty of first-degree murder. But get this. She was sentenced to life imprisonment, but was released on parole in 1985. She should have had definitely got the death penalty. I don't even know if they have that. I'm Canadian. We don't have that. So I don't know if they have that in Indiana or not, in Indianapolis. I have no idea. If so, that's what she should have got. What this woman did to not only the neighborhood kids, having them help harm this poor girl, and what she did to that poor girl and her sister Jenny is just wow. Paula was found guilty. So Paula is Gertrude's daughter, was found guilty of second-degree unaliving and was released in 1972. Hobbs and Hubbard are the neighborhood boys, and John, which is Gertrude's son, were found guilty of manslaughter and served less than 2 years in the Indiana Reformatory before being paroled on February 27, 1968. The torture and unaliving of Sylvia Likens is widely regarded by Indiana citizens as the worst crime ever committed in their state, and has been described by a senior investigator in the Indianapolis Police Department as the most sadistic case he had ever investigated in the 35 years he served with the Indianapolis Police. It's that bad. It is that bad. There's 2 movies out, okay? I don't know if you guys have seen them, but the true stories of Sylvia Likens. There's one, it's called The Girl Next Door. I liked it. It was great. It explained everything, and it had some actors in there you would know. The other one is called American Crime. There's actors in that you would know as well. They were both great movies. The books, I don't mean to say great, you know what I mean? But They were they were great in a sense that they portrayed this evil monster for what she was. And it's just one of these. At the end, it's free because of her friend that she met, one of the neighborhood boys. And of course, that's not what happened. But I think that's what the director was trying to do, just make it, maybe she finally was free from all the torture, and that's what she saw. All right, so now this is the background of Gertrude Banzowski. She was born September 19th, 1928, and looks like she passed June 16th, 1990. And she was born in Indianapolis, Indiana, to Hugh Marcus Van Fossen Sr. and Molly Myrtle, both of whom were originally from Illinois and were of American and Dutch descent. Banzowski was the third of 6 children, and her family was working class. On October 5th, 1939, Banzowski saw her 50-year-old father die from a sudden heart attack. 6 years later, she dropped out of high school at the age of 16 to marry 18-year-old John Stephen Banzowski. And this man was born in 1926, and he passed in 2007. Who was originally from Youngsville, Pennsylvania, and was of Polish ancestry, and with whom she had 4 children. Okay, I thought she had 4. John had a volatile temper and occasionally beat his wife. The two would remain together for 10 years prior to their first divorce. I actually am interested in reading the background to see what, if anything, could make her do something like that. Following her divorce, Banzowski married a man named Edward, how do you say that, Guthrie. This marriage lasted just 3 months before the couple divorced. Shortly thereafter, Banzowski remarried her first husband, with whom she had 2 more children. Yeah, 6 children now she's up to. The couple divorced for the second time in 1963. Weeks after her third divorce, Banzowski began a relationship with a 20-year-old welder named Dennis Lee Wright, who also physically abused her. She had 1 child with Wright, Dennis Lee Wright Jr., shortly after the birth of their son in May 1964. Wright abandoned Banzowski. Shortly thereafter, Banzowski filed a paternity suit against Wright for financial support of their child, although Wright seldom contributed to the care of their son. By 1965, Banzowski lived alone with her 7 children. Paula was 17, Stephanie was 15, John 12, Marie 11, Shirley 10, James 8, and Dennis Lee Wright Jr. was only 1 year old. And just think, all these children were helping to harm Sylvia Likens in the basement. Although years old and 5 feet 6 inches in height, she weighed only 100 pounds and has been described as a haggard, underweight, asthmatic, chain smoker suffering from clinical depression due to the stress of 3 failed marriages, a failed relationship, and a recent miscarriage. In addition to the sporadic checks she received from her first husband, a former Indianapolis policeman, upon whom she primarily relied financially to support her children, Gertrude occasionally performed odd jobs for neighbors and acquaintances, such as sewing or cleaning, in order to earn money. Gertrude resided in Indianapolis at 3850 East New York Street, where the monthly rent was $55 a month. So that's her background. I don't care if she was ABUSCED. I don't, because you know what? That happens to a lot of us out there, and we don't turn into homicide, like do that to people. We don't torture people. There's no damn good excuse. This will be, okay, this one's now Sylvia Likens' background. She was born January 3rd, 1949. She passed October 26, 1965. She was the third of 5 children born to carnival workers Lester Cecil Likens and his wife, Elizabeth Betty Francis. She was born between 2 sets of fraternal twins, Daniel and Diana, 2 years older than her, and Benny and Jenny, 1 year younger. Jenny Likens suffered from polio, causing one of her legs to be weaker than the other. She was afflicted with a notable limp and had to wear a steel brace on 1 leg. That's actually, obviously that's true. It is portrayed like that in the movies as well. You see she actually had, in the movie, they put braces on both legs, but she only needed it for 1. And she even got, hit by Gertrude. She got kicked down because she wasn't quick enough. Like, it was just, Sylvia got it the worst, but Jenny also suffered. Lester and Elizabeth's marriage was unstable. They often sold candy, beer, and soda at carnival stands around Indiana throughout the summer, moving frequently and regularly experiencing severe financial difficulties. The Likens' son regularly traveled with them in order to assist with their job, but Sylvia and Jenny were discouraged from doing the same out of concern for their safety and education. As a result, both sisters frequently stayed with their relatives, often their grandmother. In their teenage years, Sylvia Likens occasionally earned spending money by babysitting, running errands, or performing ironing chores or for friends and neighbors, often giving her mother part of her earnings. She has been described as a friendly, confident, and lively girl with long, wavy light brown hair extending below her shoulders, and was known as Cookie to her friends. Although exuberant, Likens always kept her mouth closed when smiling due to missing front tooth, which she had lost while roughhousing with one of her brothers during a childhood game. She was also fond of music, particularly the Beatles, and was notably protective of her markedly more timid and insecure younger sister. On several occasions, the two sisters would visit a local skating rink, where Sylvia would help Jenny skate by holding her hand, while Jenny skated on her unaffected foot. They were close sisters. The whole family was close, but they were in particularly close. All right, so July 1965. By June 1965, Sylvia and Jenny Likens resided with their parents in Indianapolis. On June 3rd, their mother was arrested and subsequently jailed for shoplifting. Shortly thereafter, Lester Likens arranged for his daughters to board with Gertrude Banzowski, the mother of two girls with whom the sisters had recently become acquainted while studying at Arsenal Technical High School, Paula and Stephanie Banzowski. So they were friends with Jenny and Sylvia. At the time of this boarding agreement, Gertrude assured Lester she would care for his daughters until his return as if they were her own children. Shortly after the July 4th holiday, the sisters moved into 3850 East New York Street in order for their father and, later, their mother to travel to the East Coast with the carnival, with the understanding that Gertrude would receive weekly boarding fees of $20 to care for their daughters until a return to collect Sylvia and Jenny in November of that year. During the initial weeks in which Sylvia and Jenny resided at the Banzowski's household, the sisters were subjected to very little discipline or abuse. Likens regularly sang along to pop records with Stephanie, and she willingly participated in housework at the Banzowski residence. Both girls also regularly attended Sunday school with the Banzowski's children, with the pastor commending Sylvia's piety. I don't understand why the children were left with a stranger. Because before they were staying with aunts and uncles and their grandmother. I don't understand why they were left with that woman. I really don't. They were poor, right? But yet they're going to pay her $20 a week, or was it a month? That doesn't even say. It just says boarding. Oh, weekly, $20 a week, and her rent was 55. So that was hot. That's a lot of money to be paying back then. $20 a week for Gertrude to take care of their daughters, which we know clearly didn't happen. This is okay. This is trigger warning. It's not pretty from here on out. So the abuse. Although Lester Likens had agreed to pay Gertrude $20 a week in exchange for the care of his daughters, after approximately 2 weeks, these payments failed to consistently arrive upon the prearranged dates, occasionally arriving 1 or 2 days late. I remember that in reading the book and also in the movie, and because of this, this is what initially started the abuse towards Sylvia. Gertrude was, for one, very jealous of Sylvia because she was very beautiful. Um, so that stung her, that stung her. But she started abusing Sylvia for the fact that her parents weren't paying her on time. Whether it's a day late or not, she still was harming them. She would take both of those children, make them bend over, hit them on the behind with a huge wooden stick. In response, Gertrude began venting her frustration at all this fact upon the sisters by beating their bare buttocks and various instruments. This is just 1/4 inch thick paddle, making statements such as, "Well, I took care of you two little bitches for a week for nothing." On one occasion in late August, both girls were beaten approximately 15 times on the back and with the aforementioned paddle. And Paula had accused the sisters of eating too much food at a church supper the household children had attended. Nice. Because Paula was supposed to be her friend. By mid August, Gertrude had begun to focus her abuse almost exclusively upon Sylvia, with her primary motivation likely being jealousy of the girl's youth, appearance, respectability, and potential. According to subsequent trial testimony, the abuse was initially inflicted upon Sylvia after she and Jenny had returned to the Banzowski's residence from Arsenal Technical High School, as well as on weekends. This initial abuse included subjecting Likens to beatings and starvation, forcing her to eat leftovers or spoiled food out of the garbage can. On one occasion, Likens was accused of stealing candy she had actually bought. Wow. On another occasion, in late August, Likens was subjected to humiliation when she claimed to have a boyfriend in Long Beach, whom she had met in the spring of 1965 when her family lived in California. In response, Gertrude asked if Sylvia had ever done anything with a boy, to which Sylvia, unsure of her meaning, replied, "I guess so," and explained that she had gone skating with boys there and had once gone to a park on the beach with them. Now remember, she's a 16-year-old girl, and you got this old haggard woman who's completely fucked in the head, and she's asking you this, and the stupid woman, Gertrude, takes it as she's being sexualized? No. Continuing with the conversation, Jenny and Stephanie, Sylvia mentioned that she had once laid under the covers with her boyfriend. Upon hearing this, Gertrude asked, "Why did you do that, Sylvia?" Sylvia replied, "I don't know," and shrugged. Several days later, Gertrude returned to the subject with Likens, telling her, "You're certainly getting big in the stomach, Sylvia. It looks like you're going to have a baby." Sylvia thought Gertrude was kidding with her and said, "Yeah, it sure is getting big. I'm going to have to go on a diet." Wow. Gertrude then informed her and the other girls in the house that whenever they did something with a boy, they would be sure to have a baby. She then kicked Likens in the genitals. Holy shit. Paula herself, 3 months pregnant and also jealous of Likens' physical appearance, then participated in attacking Sylvia, knocking her off her chair and onto the kitchen floor, shouting, "You ain't fit to sit in a chair." This is just the beginning. On another occasion, as the family ate supper, Gertrude, Paula, and a neighborhood boy named Randy Gordon Lepper force fed force fed Sylvia a hot dog overloaded with condiments, including mustard, ketchup, and spices. Sylvia vomited as a result and was later forced to consume what she had regurgitated. That was not a nice visual to see in the movies. She actually had to eat her own vomit. It was Likens' only act of retaliation. She is alleged to have spread a rumor at Arsenal Technical High School that Stephanie and Paula were prostitutes because she was upset with the household singling her out for similar accusations. While at school, Stephanie was jokingly propositioned by a boy who told her that Sylvia had started the rumor about her. Upon returning home that day, Stephanie questioned Sylvia about the rumor and she admitted to starting it. Stephanie punched her in response. And this is supposed to be your best friend. But Sylvia apologized to her in tears, and Stephanie then also began to cry. However, when Stephanie's boyfriend, 15-year-old Coy Randolph Hubbard, heard of the rumor, he brutally attacked Sylvia, slapping her, banging her head against the wall, and flipping her backwards onto the floor. When Gertrude found out, she used a paddle to beat Sylvia. On another occasion, Paula beat Sylvia about the face with such force that she broke her own wrist, having primarily focused her blows upon Sylvia's teeth and eyes. Later, Paula used the cast on her wrist to further beat Sylvia. Gertrude repeatedly falsely accused Sylvia of promiscuity and of engaging in prostitution, ranting about the filthiness of prostitution and women in general. Gertrude would later occasionally force Jenny to strike her own sister, beating Jenny if she did not comply. Jenny did do that. She actually did have to hit her sister. And when she did hit her sister, of course, Jenny didn't hit her hard, right? So because of that, Gertrude ended up beating Sylvia even more. Coy Hubbard and several of his classmates frequently visited the Banzowski residence to both physically and verbally torment Sylvia, often collaborating with Banzowski's children and Gertrude herself. With Gertrude's active encouragement, these neighborhood children routinely beat Sylvia, sometimes using her as a practice dummy in violent judo sessions. lacerating her body, burning her skin with lit cigarettes in excess of 100 times, and severely injuring her genitals. Holy fucking shit. It doesn't matter how many times I've read the book or watched the movies, it still stuns me to read these things. To entertain Gertrude and her teenage children, or accomplices, Sylvia was forced at one point to strip naked in the family living room and masturbate with a glass Pepsi Cola bottle in their presence, with Gertrude stating to all present that this act of humiliation was for Sylvia to prove to Jenny what kind of a girl you are. I couldn't even fucking imagine that. Gertrude eventually forbade Sylvia from attending school after she confessed to having stolen a gym suit from the school due to Gertrude having refused to purchase the clothing for her. For this act of theft, Gertrude whipped Sylvia with a 3-inch wide police belt. Gertrude then switched her conversation to the evils of premarital sex before repeatedly kicking Sylvia in the genitals as Stephanie railed to Sylvia's defense, shouting she didn't do anything. Gertrude then burned Sylvia's fingertips with matches before further whipping her. A few days later, Gertrude repeatedly whipped Jenny with a police belt after she reportedly stole a single tennis shoe from the shoe to wear on her strong foot. This is bullshit. This part's called turmoil. Like, you think? The Likens siblings were fearful of notifying either family members or adults at their school of the increasing incidents of abuse and neglect they were enduring, as both were afraid that doing so would only worsen their situation. And, you can't blame the sisters because, just from reading thus far, we know damn well, absolutely, they would get severe punishment for opening their mouth. Jenny, in particular, struggled against the urge to notify family members, as she had been threatened by Gertrude that she would herself be abused and tortured to the same degree as her sister if she did so. Jenny was also subjected to bullying by girls in her neighborhood, in addition to occasionally being ridiculed or beaten whenever she alluded to Sylvia's situation. Like, that is insane to me. Like, I get back then that corporal punishment was a thing, but come on, that's not even her children. Like, my God. In July and August, both Lester and Elizabeth Likens would occasionally return to Indianapolis to visit their daughters, wherever their travel schedule afforded them the opportunity. The last occasion Lester and Elizabeth visited their daughters was on October 5th. On this occasion, neither girl exhibited any visible sign of distress about her mistreatment to their parents. This was likely because both were in presence of Gertrude and her children. Almost immediately after Lester and Elizabeth had left the Banskowski household, on their final visit, Gertrude turned to face Sylvia and stated, "What are you going to do now, Sylvia? Now they're gone." On one occasion in September, the girls encountered their older sister, Diana Shoemaker, at a local park. Both Jenny and Sylvia informed Diana about the abuse they were enduring at the hands of their caregiver, adding that Sylvia was being specifically targeted for physical abuse and almost always for things she had neither said nor done. Neither sister mentioned the actual address where they resided, and initially, Diana believed her sisters must have been exaggerating their claims regarding the scope of their mistreatment. Several weeks prior to this, Sylvia and Jenny had encountered Diana in the same park, while the company of 11-year-old Marie Banskowski and Sylvia had been given a sandwich to eat. When she mentioned to her sister that she was hungry, Sylvia remained silent about the matter, although Marie revealed this fact to her family in late September. In response, Gertrude accused Sylvia of engaging in gluttony before she and Paula choked and bludgeoned her. The pair then subjected Sylvia to a scalding bath in order to cleanse her of sin, with Gertrude grabbing Sylvia's hair and repeatedly banging her head against the bath to revive her whenever she fainted. This is insane. This is beyond disgusting. Shortly after this incident, the father of a neighborhood boy named Michael John Monroe phoned Arsenal Technical High School to anonymously report that a girl with open sores across her entire body was living at the Banskowski house, as Likens had not attended school for several days. A school nurse visited East New York Street to investigate these claims. Gertrude claimed to the nurse that Sylvia had run away from her home in the previous week and that she was unaware of her actual whereabouts, adding that Sylvia was out of control and that her open sores were a result of Sylvia's refusal to maintain decent personal hygiene. Gertrude further claimed that Sylvia was a bad influence on both her own children and her sister. The school made no further investigations concerning Sylvia's welfare. There's many factors in what happened to Sylvia. The abuse, when she passed, everybody neglected this poor girl. The immediate neighbors of the band's so of the Gertrude family were a middle-aged couple named Raymond and Phyllis Vermillion. Both initially viewed Gertrude as an ideal caregiver for the Likens sisters, and both had visited Gertrude residence on 2 occasions while the girls had been under Gertrude's care. On both occasions, however, the Vermillions witnessed Paula physically abusing Sylvia, who on both occasions had a black eye, and openly boasting about her mistreatment of the child to them. Upon their second visit to the Banscoesi household, both observed Likens to appear extremely meek and somewhat zombified in nature. Nevertheless, the Vermillions never reported Sylvia's evident mistreatment to the authorities. On or about October 1st, Diana Shoemaker discovered that her sisters were at the Banscoesi's residence. She visited the property in an attempt to initiate regular contact. Gertrude, however, refused to allow Diana entry to the property, stating that she had received permission from their parents not to allow either of the girls to see her. She then ordered Diana to leave the property. Approximately 2 weeks later, Diana encountered Jenny by chance close to the home and inquired as to Sylvia's welfare. She was informed, "I can't tell you or I'll get into trouble." There's a lot of what ifs in this situation and a lot of piss me offs for me. I mean, the school should have done something. The older sister Diana should have done something. I mean, come on. The neighbor should have done something, especially if they saw Sylvia with a black eye. This next part is called escalation. Yeah, you think? Due to the increase in the frequency and brutality of the torture and mistreatment Sylvia was subjected to, she gradually became incontinent. She was denied any access to the bathroom, being forced to wet herself. As a form of punishment for her inconsistence, on October 6th, Gertrude threw Sylvia into the basement and tied her up. Here, Sylvia was often kept naked, rarely fed, and frequently deprived of water. Occasionally, she was tied to the railing of the basement stairs, with her feet barely touching the ground. No fucking buddy deserves this. That woman should have got the death penalty, and those little fuckers that helped her. In the weeks prior to locking Sylvia in the family basement, Gertrude had increasingly abused and tormented Sylvia. She would occasionally falsely claim to the children in her household that either she, herself, or one of them had been receiving direct insults from Sylvia in the hope this would provoke them into belittling or attacking her. On one occasion, Gertrude held a knife aloft and challenged Sylvia to fight me back. To which Sylvia replied she did not know how to fight. In response, Gertrude inflicted a light score wound to Sylvia's leg. Physical and mental torment, such as this, would occasionally pause when the Banscoesis watched their favorite television shows. Neighborhood children were also occasionally charged 5 cents apiece to see the display of Sylvia's body and to humiliate, beat, scald, burn, and ultimately mutilate her. Like, Jesus effing Christ. Throughout Sylvia's captivity in the basement, Gertrude frequently, with the assistance of her children and neighborhood children, restrained and gagged Likens before placing her in a bathtub filled with scalding water, proceeded to rub salt into her wounds. On one occasion, Gertrude and her 12-year-old son, John Jr., rubbed urine and feces from Gertrude's 1-year-old son's diaper into Likens' mouth before giving her a cup half filled with water and stating that the water was all she would receive for the remainder of the day. On October 22nd, John Banscoesi Jr. tormented Sylvia by offering to allow her to eat a bowl of soup with her fingers and then quickly taking away the bowl when Sylvia, by this stage suffering from extreme malnourishment, attempted to eat the food. Gertrude eventually allowed Sylvia to sleep upstairs on the condition that she learned not to wet herself. That night, Sylvia whispered to Jenny to secretly give her a glass of water before falling asleep. The following morning, Gertrude discovered that Likens had urinated on herself. As a punishment, Sylvia was forced to insert, holy fuck, an empty glass Coca-Cola bottle into her vagina in the presence of her children before Gertrude ordered her into the basement. Shortly thereafter, Gertrude shouted for Sylvia to return to the kitchen, then ordered her to strip naked before proclaiming to her, "You have branded my daughters, now I'm going to brand you." She began carving the words, "I'm a prostitute and proud of it," into Likens' abdomen with a heated needle. When Gertrude was unable to finish the branding, she instructed one of the neighborhood children present, 14, get this, 14-year-old Richard Dean Hobbs, to finish etching the words into Sylvia's flesh as she took Jenny to nearby grocery store. And what Hobbs would later insist were short, light etchings, he continued to brand the text into Sylvia's abdomen as she clenched her teeth and moaned. Both Hobbs and 10-year-old Shirley Vansgowski then led Sylvia into the basement, where each proceeded to use an anchor bolt in an attempt to burn the letter S beneath Likens' left breast, although they applied one section of the loop backwards, and this deep burn scar would resemble the number 3. Gertrude later taunted Sylvia by claiming she would never be able to marry due to the words carved on her stomach, stating, "Sylvia, what are you going to do now? You can't get married now. What are you going to do?" Weeping, Sylvia replied, "I guess there's nothing I can do." Later that day, Likens was forced to display the carving to neighborhood children, with Gertrude claiming she had received the inscription at a sex party. That night, Sylvia confided to her sister Jenny, "I know you don't want me to die, but I am going to die. I can tell it." That's so freaking sad. The following day, Gertrude woke Sylvia, then forced her to write a letter as she dictated the contents, which were intended to mislead her parents into believing their daughter had run away from the Vansgowski's house. The content of this letter was intended to frame a group of anonymous local boys for extensively abusing and mutilating Sylvia after she had initially agreed to engage in sexual relations with them before they inflicted the extreme abuse and torture upon her body. After Sylvia had written this letter, Gertrude finished formulating her plan to have John Jr. and Jenny blindfold Sylvia, then take her to a nearby wooded area known as Jimmy's Forest and leave her there to die. After she had finished writing the letter, Sylvia was then again tied to the stair railing and offered crackers to eat, although she refused them, saying, "Give it to the dog, I don't want it." In response, Gertrude forced the crackers into Sylvia's mouth before she and John beat her, particularly around the subject. Oh my God, the stomach. On October 25th, Sylvia attempted to escape from the basement after overhearing a conversation between Gertrude and John Jr. pertaining to the family's plan to abandon her to die. She attempted to flee to the front door. However, due to her extensive injuries and general weakness, Gertrude caught her before she could escape the property. Sylvia was then given crackers to eat but was unable to consume the food due to her extreme state of dehydration. Gertrude forced the crackers into her mouth before repeatedly striking her face with a curtain rod until sections of the instrument were bent into right angles. Coy Hubbard then took the curtain rod from Gertrude and struck Sylvia one further time, rendering her unconscious. Gertrude then dragged Sylvia into the basement. I'm sorry, but not one fucking person can tell me that this bitch, Gertrude, was not trying to kill her slowly. This isn't abuse gone wrong. This is fucking torture. To kill this poor girl. That evening, Sylvia desperately attempted to alert neighbors by screaming for help and hitting the walls of the basement with a spade. One immediate neighbor of the Vansgowskis would later inform police she had heard the desperate commotion and that she had identified the source as emanating from the basement of 3850 East New York Street, but that as the noise had suddenly ceased at approximately 3 a.m., she decided not to inform the police about the disturbance. Wow. Another person who failed her. This one's titled Death. By the morning of October 26, Sylvia was unable to either speak intelligibly or correctly coordinate the movement of her limbs. Gertrude moved Sylvia into the kitchen and, having propped her back up against a wall, attempted to feed her a donut and glass of milk. She threw Sylvia to the floor in frustration when Sylvia was unable to correctly move the glass of milk to her lips. She was then returned to the basement. Shortly thereafter, Sylvia became delirious, repeatedly moaning and mumbling. When Paula asked her to recite the English alphabet, Likens was unable to recite anything beyond the first 4 letters or to raise herself off the ground. In response, Paula verbally threatened her to either stand up or she would inflict a long jump upon her. Gertrude then ordered Sylvia, who had defecated, to clean herself. That afternoon, several of Likens' other tormentors gathered in the basement. Sylvia jerkingly moved her arms in an apparent attempt to point at the faces of the tormentors she could recognize, making statements such as, "You're Ricky and you're Gertie," before Gertrude tersely shouted, "Shut up, you know who I am." Minutes later, Sylvia unsuccessfully attempted to bite into a rotten pear she had been given to eat, stating she could feel the looseness of her teeth. Upon hearing this, Jenny replied, "Don't you remember, Sylvia? Your front tooth was knocked out when you were 7." Jenny then left Sylvia in the basement to perform gardening chores for neighbors in hope of earning spending money. In an attempt to wash Sylvia, a laughing John Jr. sprayed her with a garden hose brought to the house that afternoon by Randy Lepper at Gertrude's request. Sylvia again desperately attempted to exit the basement but collapsed before she could reach the stairs. In response to this effort, Gertrude stamped upon Sylvia's head before standing and staring at her for several moments. Shortly after 5:30 p.m., Richard Hobbs returned to the Banskowski's residence and immediately proceeded to the basement. He slipped on the wet basement stairs. Good! And fell heavily to the floor of the basement to be confronted with the sight of Stephanie crying and cuddling Sylvia, emaciated and lacerated body after she had been ordered by her mother to clean Sylvia. Stephanie and Richard then decided to give Sylvia a warm, soapy bath and dress her in new clothes. They then laid her upon a mattress in one of the bedrooms, as Sylvia muttered her final wish that her daddy was here and that Stephanie would take her home. Stephanie then turned to her younger sister, Shirley, exclaiming, "Oh, she'll be all right." Yeah. When Stephanie realized that Sylvia was not breathing, she attempted to apply mouth-to-mouth resuscitation as Gertrude repeatedly shouted to the children in the house that Sylvia was faking her death. Sylvia was 16 years old when she finally succumbed to her injuries. Now we're on the arrest part. Gertrude initially beat Sylvia's corpse with a book shouting, "Faker, faker," in order to rouse her. However, she soon panicked and instructed Richard Hobbs to call the police from a nearby payphone. When police arrived at her address at approximately 6:30 p.m., Gertrude led the officers to Likens' emaciated, extensively bludgeoned, and mutilated body lying upon a soiled mattress in the bedroom before handing them the letter she had forced Sylvia to write previously by her dictation. She also claimed she had been doctoring the child for an hour or more prior to her death, having applied rubbing alcohol to Sylvia's wounds in a futile attempt at first aid before she had died. She added that Likens had earlier run away from her home with several teenage boys before returning to her house earlier that afternoon, bare-breasted and clutching the note. Wow. Clutching a Bible. Paula, having stated to all present in the household that Sylvia's death was meant to happen, then glanced in Jenny's direction and calmly stated, "If you want to live with us, Jenny, we'll treat you like our own sister." As previously instructed by Gertrude, Jenny Likens recited the rehearsed version of events leading to Sylvia's death to police before whispering to the officers, "You get me out of here and I'll tell you everything." The formal statement provided by Jenny Likens prompted officers to arrest Gertrude, Paula, Stephanie, and John Jr. on suspicion of Sylvia's murder within hours of the discovery of her body. The same day, Coy Hubbard, Richard Hobbs were also arrested and charged with the same offenses. The 3 eldest children, plus Coy Hubbard, were placed in the custody of a nearby juvenile detention center. The younger Banskowski children and Richard Hobbs were detained at the Indianapolis Children's Guardians Home. All were held without bail pending trial. Initially, Gertrude denied any involvement in Sylvia's death. Although by October 27th, she had confessed to having known the kids, particularly her daughter Paula and Coy Hubbard, had physically and emotionally abused Likens, stating Paula did most of the damage and Coy Hubbard did a lot of the beating. Are you kidding me? Yeah, I remember that. She threw her own damn kids under the bus. Gertrude further admitted to having forced the girl to sleep in the basement on approximately 3 occasions when she had wet the bed. She became evasive when one officer stated the likely reasons Likens had become incontinent were her mental distress and injuries to her kidneys. Lacking any remorse, Paula signed a statement admitting to having repeatedly beaten Sylvia about the backside with her mother's police belt, once breaking her wrist on Sylvia's jaw and inflicting other acts of brutality, including pushing her down the stairs into the basement 2 or 3 times and inflicting a black eye. John Jr. admitted to having spanked Sylvia on one occasion, adding that most of the time I used my fists to abuse her. He admitted to having burned Sylvia with matches on several occasions, adding that his mother had repeatedly burned the child with cigarettes. 5 other neighborhood children who had participated in Sylvia's ABUSE Michael Monroe, Randy Lepper, Darlene McGuire, Judy Duke, and Ann Cisco had also been arrested by October 29th. All were charged with causing injury to a person and each was subsequently released into the custody of their parents under subpoena to appear as a witness at the upcoming trial. Like, that's insane how Gertrude had all that power over those kids. Here's the autopsy results. The autopsy of Sylvia's body revealed she had suffered in excess of 150 separate wounds across her entire body. In addition to being extremely emaciated at the time of death, the wounds themselves varied in location, nature, severity, and the stage of healing. Her injuries included burns, severe bruising, and extensive muscle and nerve damage. Her vaginal cavity was almost swollen shut. Moreover, all of Likens' fingernails were broken backwards, and most of the external layers of skin upon the child's face, breasts, neck, and right knee had peeled or receded. In her death throes, Likens had evidently bitten through her lip, partially severing sections of them from her face. My God. The official cause of Likens' death was listed by coroner Dr. Arthur Keble as subdural hematoma due to her receiving a severe blow to her right temple. Both the shock she had primarily suffered due to the severe and prolonged damage inflicted to her skin and subconscious tissues, plus the severe mutilation, were listed as contributory factors to her death. Rigor mortis had fully developed at the time of discovery of her body, indicating Sylvia may have been deceased for up to 8 hours before she was found. Although Dr. Keble did note Sylvia had been recently bathed, possibly after death, and that this act could have hastened the loss of body temperature and thus sped the onset of rigor mortis. Here's the funeral part. The funeral service for Sylvia Likens was conducted at the Russell and Hitch Funeral Home in Lebanon on the afternoon of October 29th. The service was officiated by Reverend Lewis Gibson with more than 100 mourners in attendance. Sylvia's great casket remained open throughout the ceremony, with a portrait of her taken prior to July 1965 adorning her coffin. In his eulogy, the Reverend Gibson stated, "We all have our time of passing, but we won't suffer like our little sister suffered during the last days of her life." The Reverend Gibson then strode towards Sylvia's casket before adding, "She is gone to eternity." Following this service, Sylvia's casket was placed by pallbearers in a hearse and driven to the Oak Hill Cemetery to be interred. This hearse was one of a 14-vehicle procession to drive to the cemetery for Sylvia's burial. Her headstone is inscribed with the words, "Our darling daughter." Indictments. On December 30th, 1965, the Marion County grand jury returned first-degree murder indictments against Gertrude and 2 of her 3 oldest children, Paula and John Jr. Also indicted were Richard Hobbs and Coy Hubbard. All were charged with having repeatedly struck, beaten, kicked, and otherwise inflicting a culmination of fatal injuries to Sylvia Likens with premeditated malice. 3 weeks prior to the filing of the indictments against the 5 defendants, Stephanie Vanskowski had been released from custody upon a writ of habeas corpus bond, with her attorney successfully contending the state had insufficient evidence to support any murder or culmination of fatal injuries charges against her. Stephanie waived her immunity from any potential impending prosecution while agreeing to testify against her family and any other individuals charged with EBUSING and unaliving Sylvia. At a formal pretrial hearing held on March 16, 1966, several psychiatrists tested before Judge Saul Isaac Rabb as to their conclusions regarding psychiatric evaluations they had concluded upon 3 individuals indicted in Sylvia's unaliving. These experts testified that all 3 were mentally competent to stand trial. Yeah, you think? Trial of Gertrude. Her children Paula and John, Richard Hobbs, Coy Hubbard began on April 18, 1966. All were tried together before Judge Rabb at Indianapolis City County Building. Initial jury selection began on this date and continued for several days. The prosecution consisted of Leroy K. New and Marjorie Westner, who announced their intention to seek the death penalty. Okay, so there was a death penalty. I thought so. For all 5 defendants. On April 16th, they also successfully argued before Judge Rabb that all the defendants should be tried together as they were ultimately charged with acting in concert in their collective crimes against Sylvia, and that as such, if each were tried separately, neither judge nor jury could hear testimony relating to a total picture of the accumulation of the offenses committed. Each prospective juror was questioned by counsels for both prosecution and defense in relation to their opinions regarding capital punishment being just penalty for first-degree murder and whether a mother was actually responsible for the deportment of her children. Jurors who expressed any opposition to the death penalty were excused from duty by Leroy New. Any who either worked with children, expressed prejudice against an insanity defense, or repulsion regarding the actual horrific nature of Sylvia's death were excused by defense counsels. Gertrude was defended by William Urbecker. Her daughter Paula was defended by George Rice. Richard Hobb was defended by James J. Netter. John Jr. and Coy Hubbard were defended by Forrest Bowman. The attorneys for Richard Hobbs, Coy Hubbard, Paula, and John Jr. claimed they had been pressured into participating into Sylvia's torment, abuse, and torture by Gertrude. Gertrude herself pleaded not guilty by reason of insanity. Are you fucking kidding me? See, I don't know, well, just from reading this stuff here and before, but there's nothing about the trial or anything else that, actually, I haven't recently read it, so it's, wow, this is a lot. This is a testimony. So one of the first witnesses to testify on behalf of the prosecution was Deputy Coroner Charles Ellis, who testified on April 29th as to the intense pain Sylvia had suffered, stating that her fingernails were broken backwards, numerous deep cuts and punctures covered much of her body, and that her lips were essentially in shreds, due to her having repeatedly bitten and chewed upon them. Ellis further testified that Sylvia had been in an acute state of shock for between 2 and 3 days prior to her death, and that Likens may have been in too advanced state of shock to offer much resistance to any form of subjective treatment in her final hours. Although he emphasized that aside from the extensive swelling inside and around her genitalia, Sylvia's body bore no evidence of direct sexual molestation. In one of the movies, Gertrude is seen forcing one of her sons to have sex with Sylvia as she is tied up. I don't know if that's true or not, but that was in one of the movies. On May 2nd and 3rd, Jenny Likens testified against all 5 defendants, stating that each had repeatedly and extensively, both physically and emotionally, abused her sister, adding that Sylvia had done nothing to provoke the assaults, and that there had been no further in either the rumors she had been falsely accused of spreading or the slurs each had made against Sylvia's character. During her testimony, Jenny stated the abuse her sister had, and to a much lesser degree she herself had endured, began approximately 2 weeks after they had begun to live at the Banskowski household, and that as the ABUSE, her sister was forced to endure escalated. Sylvia had occasionally been unable to produce tears due to the acute state of dehydration. Jenny burst into tears as she recalled now, just days before Likens had passed. She had said to her, "Jenny, I know you don't want me to pass, but I am going to pass. I can tell it." Sections of Jenny Likens' testimony were later corroborated by that of Randy Lepper, who stated he had once witnessed Sylvia crying, but that she had shed no actual tears. Lepper also testified to having witnessed Stephanie strike Sylvia real hard after her mother had ordered her to remove her clothes in his presence. He then visibly smirked. He fucking smirked as he confessed to having himself beaten Sylvia on anywhere between 10 and 40 separate instances. On May 10th, a Baptist minister named Roy Julian testified having known a teenage girl was being abused in the Banskowski's household, although he had failed to report this information to authorities, as having been informed by Gertrude that Sylvia had made advances to men for money. He had believed the girl was being punished for soliciting. This girl was filled by so many people. This is insane. The same day, 13-year-old Judy Duke also testified, admitting to having witnessed Sylvia once endure salt being rubbed into sores upon her legs until she screamed. Duke also testified to one occasion where she witnessed 10-year-old Shirley rip open Sylvia's blouse, to which Richard Hobbs had made the casual remark, "Everybody's having fun with Sylvia." The following day, Gertrude testified in her own defense. She denied any responsibility for Sylvia's prolonged ABUSE torment and ultimate death, claiming her children and other children within her neighborhood must have committed the acts within her home, which she described as being such a madhouse. She also added that she had been too preoccupied with her own ill health and depression to control children, control her children. Yeah, okay. In response to questioning relating to whether she had physically abused the Likens sisters, Gertrude claimed that although she had started to spank Sylvia on one occasion, she was emotionally unable to finish doing so and had not hit the child on any other further occasions. She denied any knowledge of Sylvia having ever endured any beating, scalding, branding, or burning within her home. 2 days later, Richard Hobbs testified in his own defense, describing how Gertrude had called Sylvia to the kitchen on October 23rd and stated to her, "You have branded my children, so now I'm going to brand you." Hobbs testified Gertrude had begun etching the insult into Sylvia's abdomen before asking him to finish the task. Although Hobbs testified this act of branding had brought blood to the surface of Likens' flesh and that Sylvia had begged him to stop, he remained adamant the section of branding he had inflicted had been light. Hobbs further testified that he had initially believed Sylvia would not be at the Banskowski household on October 26, and Gertrude had informed him she intended to get rid of Sylvia the day prior. He further stated that, after Sylvia's unaliving, he had simply returned home to watch the rest of the Lloyd Thaxton show. Wow. When Marie Banskowski was called to the stand as a witness for the defense, she broke down and admitted that she had heated the needle with Hobbs and had used to brand Sylvia's abdomen. Marie also testified as to her mother's indifference to Sylvia, evident distress in relation to the physical and mental abuse she had increasingly suffered, with her mother's full knowledge, stating that on one occasion Gertrude had sat upon a chair and crocheted as she watched a neighborhood girl named Anna Cisco attack Sylvia. Marie added that although all 5 defendants had repeatedly physically and mentally tormented Sylvia, she had most often witnessed her mother and sister committing these acts before her mother had forced Sylvia to live in the basement where the abuse had actually escalated and she had ultimately passed. Another witness to testify on behalf of the prosecution, Grace Sargent, stated how she had sat close to Paula on a church bus and had heard her openly bragging about breaking her own wrist due to severity of a beating she had inflicted to Sylvia's face on August 1st. Sargent testified Paula had finished her boasting by stating, "I tried to unalive her." Wow. Yeah, you're fucking special, eh? On May 16th, a court appointed doctor named Dwight Schuster testified on behalf of the prosecution. When questioned by Leroy New as to the exhaustive interviews and assessments he had conducted with Gertrude, Schuster stated that he had been evasive and uncooperative. Schuster testified as to his belief that Gertrude was sane and fully in control of her actions, adding that she had been sane in October 1965 and remained sane to this date. Dr. Schuster was subjected to over 2 hours of intense cross-examination by Gertrude's lawyer, William Urbecker, although he remained steadfast that Gertrude was not and has never been psychotic. This is all the court proceedings. Goddamn retrial and the parole. Here's the closing arguments for the prosecution. Deputy Prosecutor Marjorie Wessner delivered the state's closing argument before the jury on behalf of the prosecution. As each defendant, except Richard Hobbs, remained impassive, Wessner recanted the continuous mistreatment Sylvia had endured before her passing, emphasizing that at no point has Sylvia either provoked any of the defendants or received any medical care beyond occasionally having margarine rubbed into scalded sections of her face and body. Okay, I don't recall that. Wow, holy frig. Referencing specific forms and means of abuse and neglect at the defendant's hands and their collective failure to either help Sylvia or deter each other from mistreating her. Wessner described Sylvia's abuse as stomach-wrenching and compared her treatment at the hands of all 5 defendants as being the equivalent in severity to that committed against prisoners in Nazi concentration camps. I totally agree. In reference to the premeditated nature of Sylvia's passing, Wessner pointed the jury's attention to the notes Gertrude had forced Sylvia to write on October 24th, stating, Gertrude knew on October 24th she was going to hold these notes until she and the rest of the defendants had completed the unaliving of Sylvia. Holding aloft a portrait of Sylvia's taken before July 65, Wessner added, "I wish she were here today, with eyes, as in this picture, full of hope and anticipation." I'm not even going to read these Okay, I'll read a little bit. Here's the defense for the dumb assholes. So the attorney was the first defense attorney to deliver his closing argument for the jury. He attempted to portray his client as being insane and thus unable to appreciate the severity or criminality of her actions, stating, "I condemn her for being a murderess. That's what I do, but I say she's not responsible because she's not all there." Erbrecher then tapped his head to emphasize his reference to her state of mind, before adding, "If this woman is sane, put her in the electric chair. She committed acts of degradation that you would commit to a dog. She has to be crazy or she wouldn't have permitted that. You'll have to live with your conscience the rest of your life if you send an insane woman to the electric chair." Holding aloft an autopsy photograph of Sylvia, Erbrecher instructed the jury to look at this exhibit, adding, "Look at the lips on Gertrude. Look at the lips on that girl. How sadistic can a person get? The woman, Gertrude, is stark mad." Erbrecher then referred to the early testimony of a psychiatrist who had called into question Gertrude's sanity before including his argument. Forrest Bowman began his closing argument in an openly critical manner as he attacked the decision of the prosecution to seek the death penalty of juveniles, stating, "I would like to have an hour of the jury's time to explain why 16-year-olds and 13-year-olds should not be put to death," refraining from acknowledging the catalog of atrocities each had inflicted upon Sylvia. He repeatedly emphasized his client's age, stating that each was only guilty of assault and battery before seeking a verdict of not guilty with each left. George Rice began his closing argument by decrying the fact that Paula and the other defendants had been tried jointly, sidestepping the multiple instances of testimony delivered at trial, describing Paula and her mother as by far the most enthusiastic participants in Sylvia's physical ABUSE. Rice claimed the evidence presented against the client did not equate to her actual guilt of unaliving. He then ended his closing argument with a plea for the jury to return a verdict of not guilty on a girl who had gone through the indignity of being tried in all open court. I don't even want to read the rest of the closing arguments. Fuck that. Here's the rebuttal. Leroy New rebutted the defense counsel's closing arguments by promising to speak through the mangled and shredded lips of Sylvia Likens. "I see her wherever I look," outlining the catalog of mistreatment Sylvia had endured prior to her passing at the hands of each of the defendants. New directly addressed criticism he had earlier received from Boris Bowman in his closing argument regarding the prosecution cross-examining children, stating, "The prosecutor's job is to present the evidence to the best of our ability. Now let's look at some of the responsibilities here. Each one of the 5 defendants had first and foremost the responsibility to leave Sylvia Likens alone. We had the responsibility to bring all the evidence we could find that would explain this crime." Referring to the sentimental closing arguments made by various defense counsels regarding reasoning and motivation for their clients' actions, their attempts to divert responsibility to other defendants or participants, and their clients' collective failure to either help Sylvia or notify authorities, New added, "All we hear is whining appeal, anything but blame where the blame belongs." He then speculated as to the reason Sylvia did not try to escape from Gertrude's household prior to the ABUSC increasingly escalating in the final weeks of her life, stating, "I think she trusted in man. I think she did not believe these people would do this and continued to do it." He concluded his closing argument by emphasizing the defendants' unison. And by emphasizing the defendants and their collective mistreatment of Likens before asking the jury to dismiss arguments made by various defense counsels regarding who may have actually inflicted the fatal blow to Likens' head, stating, "Every mark on that girl's body contributed directly to her passing, and that was testimony. The subdural hematoma was the ultimate blow. This is the most hideous thing Indiana has ever seen, and I hope we will ever see," stating that not a shred of evidence had been produced indicating any defendant was suffering from a form of mental illness. New again requested the death penalty for each defendant, stating to the jury, "The issue here is not about the electric chair or a hospital, but about law and order. Will we shy away from the most diabolical case to ever come before a court or jury? If you go below the death penalty in your verdicts, in this case, you will lower the value of human life by that much for each defendant. The blood of this girl will forever be on their souls." Here's the convictions. The trial of the 5 defendants lasted 17 days before the jury retired to consider its verdict. On May 19th, 1966, after deliberating for 8 hours, the panel of 8 men and 4 women found Gertrude guilty of first-degree murder, recommending a sentence of life imprisonment. Paula was found guilty of second-degree murder, and Hobbs, Hubbard, and John Jr. were found guilty of manslaughter. Upon hearing Judge Rabb pronounce the verdicts, Gertrude and her children burst into tears and attempted to console each other as Hobbs and Hubbard remained impassive. Wow. On May 25th, Gertrude and Paula were formally sentenced to life imprisonment. The same day, Richard Hobbs, Coy Hubbard, and John Jr. each received sentences of 2 to 21 years to be served in the Indiana Reformatory. Retrials. So in September 1970, the Indiana Supreme Court reversed the convictions of Gertrude and Paula on the basis that Judge Saul Isaac Rabb had denied repeatedly submitted motions by their defense counsel at the original trial for both a change of venue and separate trials. The ruling further stated that the circumstances regarding the prejudicial atmosphere created during the initial trial, due to the extensive news media publicity surrounding the case, impeded any chance of either appellant receiving a fair trial. Fuck that. They both deserve the death penalty. So they were retried in 1971. On this occasion, Paula opted to plead guilty to voluntary manslaughter rather than face a retrial. She was sentenced to serve a term of between 2 and 20 years imprisonment for her part in Sylvia's ABUSC and passing. Despite twice unsuccessfully having attempted to escape from prison in 1971, she was released in December 1972. Are you fucking kidding me? Gertrude, however, was again convicted of first-degree murder and sentenced to life in prison. Over the course of the 14 years, Gertrude became known as a model prisoner at the Indiana Women's Prison. She worked in the prison sewing shop and was known as somewhat of a den mother to younger female inmates, becoming known to some within the prison by the nickname Mom. By the time of Gertrude's ultimate parole in 1985, she had changed her name to Nadine Van Fossman, a combination of her middle name and maiden name, and described herself as a devout Christian. Yeah, right, bullshit. And then the parole. News of Gertrude's impending parole hearing created uproar throughout Indiana. Jenny Likens and other immediate family members of Likens vehemently protested against any prospect of her release. The members of 2 anti-crime groups also traveled to Indiana to oppose Gertrude's potential parole and to publicly support the Likens family. Members of both groups initiated a sidewalk picket campaign over the course of 2 months. These groups collected over 40,000 signatures from the citizens of Indiana, including signatures obtained from outraged citizens who were too young to contemporarily recollect the case. All signatures gathered demanded that Gertrude remain incarcerated for the remainder of her life. Within her parole hearing, Gertrude stated her wish that Sylvia's passing could be undone, although she minimized her responsibility for any of her actions, stating, "I'm not sure what role I had in Sylvia's passing because I was on drugs." What? I never really knew her. I take full responsibility for whatever happened to Sylvia. Taking Gertrude's good conduct in prison, granting her parole, and the bitch was released from prison on December 4th, 1985. Following her 1985 release from prison, Gertrude relocated to Iowa. She never accepted full responsibility for Sylvia's prolonged torment and passing, insisting she was unable to precisely recall any of her actions in the months of Sylvia's prolonged and increasing ABUSC and torment within her home. She blamed her actions upon the medication she had been prescribed to treat her asthma. Gertrude lived in relatively obscurity in Laurel, Iowa until her death due to lung cancer. Good. I hope it fucking hurt. June 16th, 1990, at the age of 61. Regarding her passing and the issues raised pertaining to her sanity at both of her trials, John Dean, a former reporter for the Indianapolis Star who had provided extensive coverage of the case, stated in 2015, "I never thought she was insane. I thought she was a downtrodden, a mean woman." Dean also likened the case to William Golding's novel Lord of the Flies. Although he had stated Sylvia increasing physical and emotional ABUSC was not a result of children gone wild, it was children doing what they were told. Of Gertrude's actual motive for tormenting and ultimately unaliving Likens, attorney Forrest Bowen opined in 2014, "She had a miserable life. What I think this was ultimately about was jealousy." I have to agree. Here's an ugly picture of her. Photographed 1986. 1 year after her release from the Indiana Women's Prison. What Listen to this. After her 1972 parole, Paula assumed a new identity, and she worked as an aide to a school counselor for 14 years. Wow, in Iowa. Having changed her name to Paula Pace and concealing the truth regarding her criminal history when applying for the position. Wow. She was fired in 2012 when the school discovered her true identity. Good. Paula married and had two children, the baby daughter to whom she had given birth while awaiting trial in 1966 and whom she named after her mother was later adopted. Good. The unaliving charges initially filed against Gertrude's second eldest daughter, 15-year-old Stephanie, were ultimately dropped after she agreed to turn state's evidence against the other defendants. Although prosecutors did resubmit the case against Stephanie before a grand jury on May 26, 1966, the decision to later prosecute her in a separate trial never materialized. Why? Stephanie assumed a new name and became a school teacher. Wow. She later married and had several children. She was last known to have resided in Florida. When questioned at trial as to her motive for turning state's evidence, Stephanie stated, "I'm just here in the hope I can help anybody." In response, her mother's attorney, William Urbecker, replied, "Including yourself." Shortly after their mother's arrest in Marion County, Department of Public Welfare placed Marie, Shirley, and James in the care of separate foster families. The surname of all three children was legally changed to Blake in the late 1960s after their father regained their custody. Marie later married. Mary Shelton died of natural causes on June 8, 2017, at the age of 62. Dennis Lee Wright Jr. was later adopted. His adoptive mother named him Denny Lee White. He died February 5, 2012, at the age of 47. Richard Hobbs, Coy Hubbard, and John Jr. all served less than 2 years in the Indiana Reformatory before being granted parole on February 27, 1968. Richard Hobbs died of lung cancer on January 2nd, 1972, at the age of 21. Good. Less than 4 years after his release from the Indiana Reformatory. In the years between his release from the Indiana Reformatory and his passing, he is known to have suffered at least one nervous breakdown. Oh, boo fucking who. Following this 1968 release from the Indiana Reformatory, Coy Hubbard remained in Indiana and never attempted to change his name. Throughout his adult life, Howard was reportedly imprisoned for various criminal offenses, on one occasion being charged with the 1977 murders of two young men. Oh, I didn't know that. Although largely due to the fact that the chief witness to testify at his trial had been a convicted criminal acquaintance of Hubbard who admitted to having been in his company at the time of the murders, he was acquitted of this charge. Wow. Shortly after the January 2007 premiere of the crime drama film An American Crime, Hubbard was fired from his job. He passed of a heart attack in Shelbyville in Indiana on June 23rd of that year at the age of 56. Notice how all their lives are not very long lived here? No one's past the age of 60 yet. John Jr. lived in a relative obscurity under alias John Blake. He became a lay minister. Wow, okay. Frequently hosting counseling sessions for the children of divorced parents. Several decades after his release from the Indiana Reformatory, John Jr. issued a statement in which he acknowledged the fact that he and his co-defendants should have been sentenced to a more severe term of punishment, adding that young criminals are not beyond rehabilitation and describing how he had become a productive citizen. He died of diabetes in the Lancaster General Hospital on May 19, 2005, at the age of 52. Prior to his passing, he had also occasionally spoken publicly about his past, readily admitting he had enjoyed the attention Sylvia's murder brought him, and also claiming to have only ever hit Sylvia once. Holy fucking shit. The injury to person charges brought against the other juveniles known to have actively, physically, and mentally and emotionally tormented Likens. That was Ambrose Cisco, Judy Darlin Duke, Michael John Monroe, Darlene McGuire, and Randy Gordon Lepper were later dropped. Cisco died on October 23rd at the age of 44. Already a grandmother, Lepper, who had visibly smirked as he testified to having hit Likens up to 40 separate occasions, died at the age of 56 on November 14, 2010. All these people died right before the age of 60. That must mean something. 14 years. Oh, no, wrong part. Jenny Likens later married an Indianapolis native named Leonard Reese Wade. The couple had two children. Although she remained traumatized by the ABUSC, she had been forced to watch her sister endure. For the remainder of her life, Jenny was dependent on anxiety medication. She died of a heart attack Oh my God. And on June 23rd, 2004, at the age of 54 in Indiana. 14 years before her own death, Jenny Likens Wade had viewed Gertrude's obituary in a newspaper. She clipped the section from the newspaper, then mailed it to her mother with an accompanying note reading, "Some good news. Damn old Gertrude died. Ha ha ha. I am happy about that." Elizabeth and Lester Likens died in 1998 and 2013. So that would be, yeah, that's the parents of the girls, respectively. In the years prior to her own passing, Jenny Likens Wade had repeatedly emphasized that no blame should be attributed to either of her parents for placing her and Sylvia in the care of Gertrude, as all her parents had done was to naively trust Gertrude's promise to care for the sisters until the return to Indiana while in the traveling carnival. The house at 3850 East New York Street, in which Likens had been tortured and unalived, stood vacant for many years. After her passing and the arrest of her tormentors, the property gradually became dilapidated. Although discussions were held about the possibility of purchasing and rehabilitating the house and converting the property into a woman's shelter, the necessary funds to complete this project were never raised. The house itself was demolished October 23rd, 2009. The site is now a church parking lot. Memorials and a legacy. Okay, so this says in June 2001, a 6-foot tall granite memorial was formally dedicated to Sylvia Likens' life and legacy in Willard Park, Washington Street, Indianapolis. This dedication was attended by several hundred people, including members of the Likens family. The memorial itself is inscribed with these words: "This memorial is in memory of a young child who passed a tragic death. As a result, laws changed and awareness increased. This is a commitment to our children that the Indianapolis Police Department is working to make this a safe city for our children." Sylvia Likens' passing is credited with the adoption of Indiana's mandated reporter law and with an increased understanding of the investigation and recognition of ABUSC. The law states that should a member of the public suspect a child is suffering of ABUSC or neglect, the citizen suspecting this ABUSC has a legal obligation to report the ABUSC to authorities. On October 26, 2015, numerous Indianapolis citizens, including Likens' older sister, Diana Bedwell, gathered in Lebanon, Indiana, to honor Sylvia Likens, to reflect upon her life upon the 50th anniversary of her passing, and to honor all children who lose their lives to child ABUSC. At this memorial service, Diana informed those present that Sylvia's legacy must always be remembered. Sylvia's tragic unaliving in ABUSC must always be remembered. And now they have here, which I thought was really good, the Sylvia's Child Advocacy Center. So the Sylvia's Child Advocacy Center is officially dedicated to the memory of Sylvia Likens, founded in 2010 in Lebanon, Indiana, and initially named the Boone County Child Advocacy Center. This nonprofit organization was renamed in Likens' honor in 2016, with executive director stating, "The most important thing that we can do is are tell kids they are hurt and we are listening." This was something no one did for young Sylvia. Her family is thankful, though it doesn't have to be that way anymore. She did not pass in vain. She passed a horrific passing, but because of that, we're hoping that another child can be saved. The Child Advocacy Center was formed with the objective to assist child victims of ABUSC and neglect, to minimize the ongoing traumatic effects experienced as a result of their ordeal, and to undertake a relentless pursuit to prevent child ABUSC in both Boone and Montgomery counties. Professionals at Sylvia's Child Advocacy Center work in concert with both law enforcement and local Department of Child Services. Staff also conduct forensic interviews and provide assistance with legal procedures, as well as mental and medical health referrals. Here's the two movies I was telling you about. So there's The American Crime and The Girl Next Door. All right, I'll show you the EVP. Okay. Hope it works. I'm on my computer, not my laptop. I'm still waiting to get a new one. I have to wait till Friday. So these two guys, they go with a recorder and they end up going to Gertrude's old house. And you do hear, I'm telling you, here, Sylvia, it's heartbreaking. Okay, I'm just gonna mute myself. Sorry, this is so long. I apologize. The video here is very shaky. I just hope you guys can see it and hear it.
Yeah, two girls tortured and she wasn't raped. She was. What up, Columbia? Does that top work? Dude, come here. This is fucking freaky. As you can see, this is what the basement looks like. Oh, hell no, there's a picture of the stairs, too. Dude, I ain't fucking. I'm not fucking. You got a It's right here on the right is 38 hours. Sorry, no. When I'm at my boarded up still. So you won't be.
Did you hear it? You can hear her say, "Help me." Oh, wait. Can you help me? Oh my God. She's still there. She's still there. I guarantee you, even with that house torn down and it being a church parking lot since 2009, I guess. I don't. Anyways, I need to watch something funny. I've been wanting to do this for a very long time. This story's just always struck a nerve with me, and I'm learning new things every time I watch something or read something. There seems to be new things that come up that I didn't know. I'm not going to say I hope you guys enjoyed it, but um, this is the true crime stuff that I'm going to be continuing to do, mostly for Canadian stuff, because a lot of you guys don't know a lot about. Well, we have a lot of stuff, not as much as you guys in the States, but there's Canadian crimes that need to be discussed as well. So I do plan on doing that, but I just wanted to get this one off my chest. I hope you liked it. Again, those movies, if you want to watch them, are An American Crime and The Girl Next Door. Trigger warning, they're very hard to watch. Um, Anyways, I hope you guys have a great night. And I'll see you next time. Bye.